June 6, 1944. 7:30 a.m. Brigadier General Norman Cota stepped from his landing craft into waist-deep water, 400 yards from Omaha Beach. What he saw would haunt military planners for generations. Soldiers from the 116th Infantry Regiment and the 29th Infantry Division were pressed against a seawall, frozen in place. They'd stopped advancing. Above them, from concrete bunkers positioned 200 feet up on the bluffs, German machine gun fire raked the beach in systematic sweeps. Artillery shells detonated in the surf. Bodies drifted in the waves. Burning tanks littered the sand. The invasion was collapsing before Cota's eyes. At 51 years old, Cota was among the most senior officers to land with the first waves. As Assistant Division Commander of the 29th Infantry Division, he'd seen combat before, but nothing like this. The Germans had positioned approximately 12,000 soldiers from the 352nd Infantry Division along this 5-mile stretch of coastline. Nearly 7,000 were combat infantry. They occupied fortified positions on the high ground, their interlocking fields of fire covering every possible approach route. American doctrine had been clear. The pre-invasion bombardment would neutralize these defenses. The plan called for 40 minutes of naval gunfire, followed by 30 minutes of heavy bomber strikes. The defenses would be destroyed before the first infantryman touched shore at 6:30 a.m. American commanders believed in firepower. They believed overwhelming force could destroy any defensive position. The numbers supported this belief. Thousands of tons of explosives targeting a 5-mile beach. Nothing could survive that kind of punishment. The Germans would be dead or too stunned to resist effectively. The infantry would walk ashore against token resistance. The Germans had prepared for exactly this scenario. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had assumed command of coastal defenses in late 1943. He'd witnessed Allied firepower firsthand in North Africa. He understood the Allies would bombard before landing, so he designed defenses to survive bombardment. Rommel ordered construction of massive concrete bunkers with 6-foot-thick walls. He positioned them to create interlocking fields of fire. He built beach obstacles, steel barriers, and wooden posts topped with mines designed to tear open landing craft hulls. He laid thousands of mines in the sand and behind the seawall. He told his officers the invasion had to be stopped at the waterline. The first 24 hours would determine the war's outcome. If the Allies established a beachhead and got off the beaches, German forces would never dislodge them. The Allies had too much material, too many men, too much air power. Once they got ashore in strength, they'd win. So the beach was everything. The beach was where Germany would win or lose. Every defensive position was designed with this principle in mind. Kill them on the beach. Stop them in the water. Don't let them get inland. But the bombardment had failed catastrophically. The Navy fired from too far offshore, between 5,000 and 6,000 yards out to avoid German coastal artillery. Most shells overshot their targets and exploded inland. 2 battleships, 3 cruisers, and 13 destroyers pounded the beach for 40 minutes. They fired thousands of rounds. The noise was deafening. The flashes illuminated the pre-dawn darkness. From offshore, it appeared the entire coast was being obliterated. But the Germans, in their concrete bunkers, barely felt it. The shells were landing behind them in fields and villages inland. The fortifications on the bluffs remained untouched. The air bombardment proved equally ineffective. Bombers flying through heavy cloud cover at high altitude released their bombs late to avoid hitting approaching landing craft. 448B. 24 liberators from the 8th Air Force dropped 13,000 bombs in 30 minutes. Nearly all landed 1 to 3 miles inland. They killed livestock. They cratered empty fields. They destroyed abandoned buildings. They didn't touch a single German bunker on the beach. The bombardiers couldn't see their targets through the clouds. They relied on instruments and timing, but the timing was off. Every bomb aimer added a few extra seconds before release, just to be safe, just to ensure they didn't hit American troops. Those few seconds meant bombs fell inland. The safety margin designed to protect the infantry doomed them instead. When the first wave hit Omaha at 6:30, they ran straight into intact German defenses. Company A of the 116th Regiment landed directly in front of a fortified strongpoint at Dog Green Sector. The ramp dropped. German machine guns opened fire immediately. 32 men were killed before they left their landing craft. They died in the boat or in the water trying to get out. Those who made it to the water carried 60 pounds of equipment. Some drowned in water over their heads. Others were cut down by machine gun fire as they struggled toward shore. The company had landed in the worst possible location. A German strongpoint designated WN. 71 sat on the bluff directly overlooking their position. The bunker housed 3 machine guns with perfect fields of fire covering the entire sector. The Germans couldn't miss. They simply aimed at the waterline and fired. Company A suffered 65% casualties in the first 10 minutes. Within 30 minutes, 96% of the company was dead, wounded, or combat ineffective. Out of over 200 men, fewer than 20 made it across the beach uninjured and ready to fight. The company had effectively ceased to exist as a fighting unit before most of them reached the sand. Soldiers who reached the beach found themselves pinned behind a low seawall with barbed wire blocking their advance. Without Bangalore torpedoes or wire cutters, they couldn't move forward. Without leadership, they wouldn't move at all. The plan was dying. Soldiers were dying. And Norman Cota was watching it happen from 200 yards offshore. The problem wasn't that American soldiers didn't know what to do. They knew. Every briefing had emphasized it. Get off the beach. Move inland. Find cover. Attack the strongpoints. The training had been exhaustive. The 1st Infantry Division had fought in North Africa and Sicily. They were veterans. The 29th Division had trained in England for 2 years. They knew their jobs. But knowing what to do and being able to do it are fundamentally different things. On Omaha Beach that morning, everything that could go wrong did. Landing craft hit sandbars 600 yards from shore and dropped their ramps in deep water. Men carrying 60 pounds of equipment drowned before reaching the beach. Amphibious tanks designed to swim ashore ahead of the infantry sank in rough seas. 27 of 32 DD tanks from the 741st Tank Battalion went straight to the bottom. The infantry arrived without armor support. Navy coxswains, disoriented by smoke and terrified of German artillery, landed units in wrong sectors. Entire companies became separated from their officers. Radio equipment got soaked and stopped working. Engineers carrying Bangalore torpedoes were killed before they could clear wire obstacles. The German fire was devastating. Machine guns fired from concrete casemates the naval bombardment hadn't scratched. Mortars dropped shells directly onto landing craft as ramps went down. Artillery batteries on the high ground had pre-registered coordinates for every square meter of beach. They fired for effect without needing to adjust. The beach became a killing zone. Bodies piled up along the waterline. Wounded men drowned as the tide came in. Equipment littered the sand. Burning vehicles blocked the exits. The noise was overwhelming: explosions, gunfire, men screaming. The smell of cordite, burning fuel, and death. Every sense told the soldiers the same thing: they were going to die here. So they stopped. They found whatever cover they could. They pressed themselves into the sand behind the seawall and stayed there because moving meant death. The official plan hadn't accounted for this. The plan assumed the bombardment would work. The plan assumed tanks would land on time. The plan assumed engineers would clear obstacles. The plan assumed leadership would remain intact. The plan assumed soldiers would follow doctrine even when everything fell apart. The plan was a fantasy. By 7 a.m., 1,600 American soldiers were pinned on Omaha Beach. None had advanced more than 200 yards inland. The beachhead was 400 yards deep at its deepest point. It should have been 2 miles deep by now. Division headquarters offshore couldn't get accurate reports. Radio communications were failing. Officers were dead or separated from their units. Nobody knew what was happening. Some commanders considered calling off the entire landing. The situation looked hopeless. That's when Norman Cota arrived. Within the first hour, Cota witnessed systematic destruction all around him. Bodies floated in the surf. Wounded men called for medics who couldn't reach them. Equipment was scattered everywhere: rifles, helmets, packs, ammunition boxes, all abandoned as men fought just to reach cover. An unnamed lieutenant was trying to organize a squad behind the seawall when a mortar round landed directly on his position. 4 men died instantly. 3 others were wounded badly enough that they'd die within the hour without medical attention. Medical attention wasn't coming. The aid stations were overwhelmed. Medics were being shot despite wearing Red Cross armbands. The Germans either didn't care about the Geneva Convention or figured the Red Crosses made excellent targets. Major Charles Tetmeyer, regimental surgeon for the 16th Infantry, wrote in his after-action report that the Geneva Convention was worthless. The white brassards drew fire. Company aid men were being targeted intentionally. He watched medics get hit while treating wounded men. The Germans appeared to target them specifically. The beach was divided into sectors with code names: Dog Green, Dog White, Dog Red, Easy Green, Easy Red, Fox Green, Fox Red. Each sector had specific units assigned. But the plan had broken down immediately. Landing craft commanders, blinded by smoke and disoriented by chaos, put men ashore wherever they could. Units were scattered across wrong sectors. Officers couldn't find their companies. Companies couldn't find their platoons. The chain of command had disintegrated in the first 10 minutes. Engineers from the 299th Engineer Combat Battalion were trying to emplace a Bangalore torpedo under barbed wire near the Virville Draw. The Bangalore was 50 feet long, packed with 85 pounds of TNT, assembled by hand under fire. The engineers got the torpedo in position and were connecting the detonator when German machine gun fire killed 2 instantly. The 3rd engineer tried to complete the detonation. He was hit before he could set the charge. The Bangalore lay there useless, while men behind the wire stayed pinned down. Cota watched this happen from 40 yards away. He saw the problem immediately. Without Bangalore torpedoes, there was no way through the wire. Without a way through the wire, there was no way off the beach. Without getting off the beach, everyone was going to die. Doctrine said engineers would clear obstacles. But the engineers were dead. Doctrine didn't have a backup plan for this. By 7:15, Cota had seen enough. Norman Cota had watched too many men die. He'd watched too many soldiers freeze behind inadequate cover. He'd watched the entire invasion stall because nobody was moving. So he started walking. He walked upright across the beach toward the seawall. German fire was everywhere. Bullets snapped past him. Mortar shells landed close enough to throw sand on him. He didn't duck. He didn't run. He walked. When he reached the seawall, he found soldiers from the 116th Infantry Regiment and 5th Ranger Battalion huddled behind it, soaked, exhausted, terrified. Some had rifles fouled with sand and water. Others had lost their weapons entirely. They looked at Cota with blank expressions. Shell shock, combat fatigue, whatever you wanted to call it. These men had stopped functioning as soldiers. Cota knelt beside them and spoke clearly. He told them they were being killed on the beaches. He told them they needed to go inland. He told them staying here meant death just as surely as moving forward did. But at least moving forward gave them a chance. Then he stood up and kept walking. What happened in the next 4 hours would determine whether the Normandy invasion succeeded or failed. The plan had been clear. Get infantry off the beach in the first 30 minutes. Secure beach exits in the first hour. Move 2 miles inland by noon. Link up with British forces at Gold Beach to the east and American forces at Utah Beach to the west. By nightfall on June 6th, the 1st Infantry Division was supposed to control Colleville-sur-Mer and be pushing toward Bayou. But plans die when they meet reality. The reality at Omaha Beach was that American forces were stuck. The beach exits, narrow draws through the bluffs, were covered by German strongpoints. Machine guns and mortars had pre-registered fire on every approach. Even if soldiers got through the wire, They'd be slaughtered trying to climb the draws. The Germans knew this. They'd spent years fortifying these positions. They'd cleared fields of fire. They'd placed obstacles. They'd registered artillery coordinates. Every inch of beach was covered by overlapping fire. The defenses weren't designed to repel every attacker. They were designed to slow the Americans down long enough for German reinforcements to arrive and push them back into the sea. Field Marshal Rommel had inspected these defenses personally. He told his officers the invasion must be stopped at the waterline. Once the Allies established a beachhead and got their armor ashore, German forces wouldn't be able to dislodge them. The beach was the killing zone. The beach was where the war would be decided. Rommel understood this perfectly. So did Cota. The difference was that Cota was standing on the beach with the soldiers who were dying. He wasn't reading reports miles away. He was there in the middle of it. And he could see exactly what needed to happen. Somebody had to move forward. Somebody had to find a way through the wire. Somebody had to attack those strong points. And that somebody had to be him. At approximately 7:45, Cota found a group of Rangers from the 5th Ranger Battalion pinned near a section of damaged wire. The wire wasn't completely intact. Naval gunfire had torn a gap in it, maybe 3 feet wide. The gap was under direct fire from a German machine gun positioned 70 yards up the bluff. Any soldier trying to go through would be cut down immediately. The Rangers knew this. They'd tried twice already. Both times the first man through was killed instantly. Now they were stuck, waiting for someone else to figure out what to do. Cota walked up to them and asked what unit they belonged to. Someone answered, 5th Rangers, sir. Cota looked at the gap in the wire, looked at the machine gun position, looked back at the Rangers, and said something that became the motto of every Ranger unit that followed. Well, goddammit, Rangers, lead the way. Then he walked through the gap himself. The machine gun didn't fire. Maybe the German gunner was reloading. Maybe he was distracted by fire from a destroyer offshore. Maybe he just didn't see Cota in time. It didn't matter. Cota made it through, turned around, and waved the Rangers forward. They followed him. 12 men made it through the gap before the machine gun opened up again. 2 were hit. The rest scattered and found cover in tall grass on the slope leading up the bluff. Cota kept moving. He crawled up the slope with Rangers spread out behind him. When they reached a position where they could see the machine gun bunker, Cota directed suppressing fire, while 2 Rangers worked their way around to the flank. They got close enough to throw grenades through the bunker's firing slit. The machine gun stopped. That was the first German strongpoint cleared on Omaha Beach. The time was 8:04 a.m., 1 hour and 34 minutes after the first wave landed. Cota's action did something the naval bombardment and air strikes hadn't done. It showed soldiers on the beach that German defenses could be beaten. If Cota could walk through the wire and knock out a machine gun bunker, then so could they. Word spread along the beach. A general had broken through near Vierville. Men started moving, not in organized units, not according to plan, but in small groups. A squad here. A fire team there. Soldiers who'd been frozen by fear 10 minutes earlier suddenly found themselves following sergeants and lieutenants who decided it was time to stop dying on the beach and start killing Germans inland. By 8:30, Bangalore torpedoes were being placed successfully. Engineers who'd survived the initial landing started clearing wire obstacles. They worked under covering fire from riflemen who'd organized themselves into improvised fire teams. The engineers would slide a Bangalore torpedo under the wire, connect the sections, arm the detonator, shout a warning, and detonate the charge. The explosion would blow a gap 4 meters wide. Infantry would pour through before Germans could react. Then the process would repeat 50 yards further up the beach. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't according to plan. But it worked. Cota didn't stop with one bunker. He kept moving up and down the beach for the next 3 hours. He'd find a unit that was stuck, assess the problem, and either solve it himself or direct someone else to solve it. His presence alone changed the dynamic. Soldiers saw a general walking upright under fire and realized that if he could do it, maybe they could too. At one point, he came across soldiers pinned by a German sniper in a church steeple in Vierville. The sniper had a clear view of the beach exit and was picking off anyone who tried to advance. Men were dying one by one as they attempted to move up the draw. Cota found a soldier with a bazooka, pointed at the steeple, and told him to shoot it. The soldier looked at him like he was crazy. Shoot a church? Cota repeated the order. The soldier fired 3 rounds. The first 2 missed. The third hit the steeple. The sniper stopped firing. The draw was open. Near the Les Moulins draw, Cota encountered Company C of the 116th Infantry Regiment huddled behind the seawall. They'd been there for 90 minutes. Their company commander was dead. Their executive officer was wounded. Nobody was giving orders. The men just sat there waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Cota organized them into 2 groups, designated one sergeant as acting commander, and personally led them through a gap in the wire that engineers had just blown open. He didn't ask them to follow. He didn't give them a choice. He just started walking, and they went with him because the alternative was sitting on the beach waiting to die. When they reached the base of the bluff, he pointed toward a German machine gun position and told them to take it out. They did, not because they suddenly became brave, but because Cota had shown them it was possible. The German positions could be taken. The bunkers could be destroyed. They just had to move. On the eastern end of the beach near Fox Green, Cota found a group of soldiers arguing about whether to wait for tank support or advance on foot. The tanks that hadn't sunk were still down on the beach, trying to find routes through obstacles. The soldiers were using the absence of armor as an excuse not to move. Cota settled the argument by walking past them toward the German positions. He didn't say anything. He just went. The soldiers followed. They didn't have a choice. A general was walking into enemy fire. If they didn't follow, they'd look like cowards. So they went. Cota led them up the bluff to a German trench line. The Germans saw them coming and opened fire. The Americans went to ground, found cover, and started shooting back. They cleared the trench with grenades and rifle fire. It took 20 minutes. 3 Americans died. But the trench was theirs, and the Germans fell back to the next defensive line. The technique Cota used wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't some brilliant tactical innovation. He simply led from the front. He showed soldiers what needed to be done by doing it himself. Where other officers shouted orders from behind cover, Cota walked upright under fire. Where other officers waited for supporting units to arrive, Cota attacked with whoever was nearby. Where other officers tried to reorganize units according to plan, Cota grabbed whatever soldiers he could find and used them. The effect was immediate and profound. Soldiers who'd been paralyzed by fear started moving when they saw a 51-year-old general walking through machine gun fire like he was inspecting a parade ground. It wasn't rational. It wasn't doctrine. It was pure leadership by example. Junior officers who'd lost their commanders started making decisions instead of waiting for orders. If a general could make decisions under fire without perfect information, then so could they. They stopped waiting for the situation to match the plan and started dealing with the situation as it actually was. Sergeants who'd been trying to keep their men alive by keeping them behind cover started thinking about how to attack. They realized staying put was just as dangerous as moving forward, maybe more dangerous. At least movement gave them a chance to do something about the machine guns killing them. The psychology of the beach changed. For 2 hours, the psychological momentum had been all German. They were dug in. They had good fields of fire. They were killing Americans by the hundreds. Every man who tried to advance was cut down. Every attack was stopped. The Germans were winning, and everyone knew it. The Americans were disorganized, leaderless, and dying. They had no momentum. They had no hope. They were just trying to survive the next 5 minutes. The idea of actually getting off the beach and attacking German positions seemed impossible. But Cota's presence changed the equation. He didn't just organize attacks. He changed what soldiers believed was possible. He showed them the Germans could be beaten, not by brilliant tactics or overwhelming firepower, but by simple determination. By refusing to accept that the situation was hopeless. By walking forward and trusting others to follow. By 9 a.m., small groups of American infantry were fighting their way up the bluffs all along Omaha Beach. They weren't moving according to plan. The plan had died at 6:30 when the first wave landed. But they were moving, and that's what mattered. The breakthrough wasn't coordinated. There was no central command directing the assault. Radio communications were still failing. Officers still couldn't talk to each other. Units were still scattered and disorganized. But individual squads and platoons were making their own decisions. A sergeant would see a gap in the wire and lead his men through it. A lieutenant would spot a German position and organize an attack with whoever was nearby. Engineers would blow a path through obstacles, and infantry would pour through before Germans could react. The Germans had prepared for a coordinated assault. They'd planned their defenses to stop organized attacks by battalion or regiment-sized units. They'd registered artillery on likely approach routes. They'd positioned machine guns to create killing zones that would stop any frontal assault. But the Americans weren't attacking frontally anymore. They weren't moving in organized units. They were infiltrating, small groups finding weak points, exploiting gaps, getting behind German strongpoints, and attacking them from unexpected directions. German defenders found themselves taking fire from positions they thought were secure. Machine gun bunkers that had dominated the beach suddenly had American infantry throwing grenades through their rear access doors. Artillery observers who'd been directing fire onto the beach found themselves fighting off infantry attacks on their observation posts. By 9:30, the German defensive line wasn't a line anymore. It was a series of isolated strong points surrounded by Americans who were bypassing them and pushing inland. Some strong points continued fighting. Others surrendered. Others were simply abandoned as defenders realized they were cut off and ran for the rear. By mid-morning, the German command structure began sensing the shift. Colonel Ernst Goth, leading the 916th Grenadier Regiment of the 352nd Infantry Division, sat in his headquarters at Trevieres reviewing incoming reports. What he heard troubled him deeply. American forces, supposedly trapped against the waterline, were now advancing with unexpected aggression. His strong points around Vierville and Colleville faced coordinated assaults. Though miles from the action, Goth could hear the intensity of combat through crackling radio transmissions. The 352 ND Division's strategy relied on containing the Americans until armored reinforcements arrived for a decisive counterattack. Rommel had promised that panzers would sweep down to the coast and drive the invaders back into the channel. That was the plan. That was the promise. But the armor wasn't moving. Allied air supremacy had turned every road into a death trap. Fighter bombers circled overhead like hawks, destroying any German column that attempted daylight movement. The beach defenders were fighting alone. Goth ordered his company commanders to maintain their positions. Reinforcements would arrive after dark, he assured them. Just hold for 10 more hours. Hold until nightfall. Then the panzers would come. Then they'd counterattack. Then victory would be theirs. His commanders reported back with grim news. Ammunition was running critically low. The naval bombardment hadn't destroyed their bunkers, but it had severed supply routes. Cratered roads prevented resupply trucks from getting through. Machine gun crews were down to their last few hundred rounds. Mortar teams rationed every shell. Artillery batteries scraped the bottom of their ammunition reserves. And still the Americans kept coming. The German defenders had executed their duties flawlessly. They'd constructed formidable fortifications. They'd established perfect fields of fire. They'd trained extensively for this moment. They'd killed hundreds of Americans in the first hour. By every tactical measure, they were winning. Yet they were losing, because the Americans simply refused to quit. At 10:20, one of Goth's strongpoints fell. American infantry from the 5th Ranger Battalion struck from 3 directions simultaneously. They used rifle grenades to suppress the bunker's firing ports, then stormed it with grenades and satchel charges. 24 Germans surrendered. The Vierville draw stood open. German officers, observing from inland positions, watched in disbelief. American soldiers, who'd been pinned down mere hours ago, were now assaulting fortified positions, with seemingly reckless abandon. They weren't employing sophisticated tactics. They were simply advancing relentlessly, absorbing casualties, grinding through defenses through sheer willpower. By 11 a.m., 3 of 5 beach exits had fallen into American hands. Infantry from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions pushed inland toward Colleville-sur-Mer and Vierville. The beachhead was no longer in danger of collapsing. The invasion would succeed. German commanders recognized reality. At 11:30, General Dietrich Reiss, commanding the 352nd Infantry Division, reported to General Marx at 84 Corps headquarters that his forces could no longer contain the American penetration. He requested permission to withdraw to prepared positions 3 kilometers inland. Permission denied. Hitler had personally decreed that every meter of French soil must be defended. Retreat was forbidden. So crisis soldiers remained in their positions and died as American infantry eliminated them one by one. The psychological impact on German troops was devastating. For 2 years they'd been told the Atlantic Wall was impregnable. They'd spent months constructing fortifications. They'd trained for the invasion. They knew their fields of fire. They occupied excellent defensive positions. None of it had mattered. The Americans had come ashore anyway, despite horrific casualties, despite every advantage of terrain and fortification, despite everything the Germans had thrown at them, the Americans had broken through. German soldiers began surrendering in increasing numbers. At 1:30 p.m., an entire platoon from the 726th Grenadier Regiment surrendered to a single American sergeant near Colleville. They'd expended their ammunition and saw no point dying for positions already being bypassed. By mid-afternoon, German resistance at Omaha Beach had collapsed. Isolated pockets continued fighting, but the defensive line was shattered. American forces controlled the bluffs and pressed inland. Supply ships began unloading on the beach. Reinforcements came ashore in steady streams. The battle for Omaha was over. The battle for Normandy was just beginning. Victory came with a horrifying price. The 1st Infantry Division suffered 1,164 casualties on June 6, including 186 killed. The 29th Division lost 743 men, 328 of them killed. Attached Ranger units lost 135. Engineers, naval personnel, and support units pushed total American casualties at Omaha to approximately 2,400, with roughly 700 killed. The 116th Infantry Regiment, spearheading the first wave, lost 971 men, killed, missing, or wounded. 27% of their strength, gone in a single day. Some companies were virtually annihilated. Officers and sergeants who'd trained together for months died together in minutes. The town of Bedford, Virginia sent 46 men to war as part of Company A, 116th Regiment. 19 died on June 6th. 3 more died later in the campaign. Bedford suffered the highest per capita D-Day loss of any American community. The entire town mourned. Nearly every family had lost someone. Captain Emerald Ralston's medical company attempted to land at 8:30. Artillery fire struck their landing craft. The boat ignited. 20 medics jumped into the water. Most drowned, dragged under by their equipment. Ralston reached shore with 12 survivors out of 90 men. 80% casualties before touching the beach. They had no medical supplies. Everything went down with the landing craft. So they worked as litter bearers all day, carrying wounded up and down the bluffs under sniper fire. They used whatever they could scavenge, bandages from dead medics, morphine from casualty stations. They saved lives with bare hands and scraps of equipment. Staff Sergeant Arnold Lambert established a battalion aid station on Fox Green Beach behind a concrete obstacle. The concrete slab, barely 3 feet high, was the only cover available. Lambert worked there for 14 hours straight, treating over 300 wounded men. He worked without proper supplies, without adequate shelter, under constant fire. Wounded men arrived faster than he could treat them. He performed triage on the beach. Save who you can. Make the others comfortable. Move to the next one. Lambert received the Bronze Star. He survived the war and lived to be 100. He died in 2021, one of the last surviving D-Day medics. He rarely discussed that day. When people asked how he endured 14 hours while men died around him, he'd simply say he did his job. That's all. Just his job. The names of the fallen are carved on memorials at Normandy American Cemetery. 27 Pennsylvania members of the 1st Infantry Division are buried there. 3 were from Northampton County. Private Leonard Groger, Private Franklin Sullivan, Private John Nex. All killed on June 6th. Groger was a machinist from Bethlehem. Sullivan was from Easton. Nex was 19 years old. Their families received telegrams. The War Department regrets to inform you that your son was killed in action on June 6, 1944, in France. The telegrams didn't explain that the plan had failed. They didn't mention that the bombardment missed its targets. They didn't say that soldiers had been left to die on a beach until a general walked through machine gun fire and inspired them to advance. The telegrams just said killed in action. And the families mourned. Norman Cota survived D-Day. He continued leading from the front throughout the Normandy campaign. He didn't change his approach. He still walked around under fire. He still personally led attacks when subordinates hesitated. His soldiers knew that if Cota was present, they had to perform. You couldn't hide behind excuses when the general stood beside you taking the same fire. On July 18, 1944, he was wounded by shrapnel during the battle for St. Lo. The injury wasn't severe enough for evacuation. Shrapnel tore into his leg and arm. Medics patched him up at a field hospital. He returned to duty within days, still limping, but refusing to remain in the rear. On August 14th, he was promoted to command the 28th Infantry Division after its previous commander was relieved for poor performance. The 28th had been mauled in the Normandy hedgerows. Casualties were high, morale was low. They needed a commander who could restore their fighting spirit. Cota did exactly that. Cota led the 28th Division through the liberation of Paris, into Belgium, and across the German border. His division was among the first Allied units to enter Germany. They fought through the Siegfried Line, taking German towns and villages one at a time. The 28th Division became known as a formidable fighting unit under Cota's leadership. In December 1944, the 28th Division was hit hard during the Battle of the Bulge. They were defending a thinly held section of the Ardennes Forest, a quiet sector where exhausted units rested and new divisions got their first combat experience. 28 miles of front held by 3 regiments spread thin. It seemed safe. The Germans weren't expected to attack there. Then 3 German panzer divisions attacked on December 16th. The assault's weight fell directly on Cota's division. They were outnumbered 5-1, outgunned. They had no hope of holding. But Cota's division didn't break. They fought. They delayed the German advance for 2 critical days. Individual units held crossroads and bridges far longer than anyone thought possible. Some fought until overrun. Some fought until their ammunition ran out. But they bought time. That delay, those 2 days, allowed American reinforcements to reach and establish defensive positions at Bastogne and Saint-Vith. The German offensive stalled. The Battle of the Bulge was won because units like the 28th Division refused to collapse when they were supposed to. Cota's division was nearly destroyed. They took massive casualties, but they delayed the German advance long enough for the counterattack to be organized. Cota personally organized the defense, moving from unit to unit under fire, just as he had at Omaha Beach. Same style, same leadership, same results. Cota was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his D-Day actions. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy while serving as Assistant Division Commander, 29th Infantry Division, in action against enemy forces on June 6, 1944. General Cota landed on the beach shortly after the first assault wave. At this time, the beach was under heavy enemy rifle machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire. Numerous casualties had been suffered. The attack was arrested and disorganization was in process. With complete disregard for his own safety, General Cota moved up and down the fire-swept beach, reorganizing units and coordinating their action. Under his leadership, a vigorous attack was launched that successfully overran enemy positions and cleared the beaches. The citation doesn't mention that he walked through machine gun fire. It doesn't say he personally led the first successful assault off the beach. It doesn't explain that he spent 4 hours moving from unit to unit, organizing attacks, directing fire, showing soldiers by example that German defenses could be broken. But the soldiers who were there knew. After the war, there was a campaign to upgrade Cota's Distinguished Service Cross to the Medal of Honor. Many officers and enlisted men who served under him at Omaha wrote letters supporting the upgrade. They argued his actions on June 6th had saved the invasion and deserved the nation's highest award. The campaign failed. The official explanation was that the Medal of Honor required witnessed acts of heroism beyond the call of duty. Cota's actions, while heroic, were considered within the scope of his responsibilities as a general officer. Norman Cota retired from the Army in 1946 as a Major General. He returned to the United States, settled in Kansas, and lived quietly. He married Alice Weeks McCutcheon in October 1970. He died on October 4, 1971, at age 78. He was buried at West Point, where he graduated in April 1917. His tombstone is simple. It lists his name, rank, and dates of service. It doesn't mention Omaha Beach. It doesn't say he personally led the breakthrough that saved the D-Day invasion. It doesn't explain that thousands of soldiers followed him up those bluffs because he showed them it could be done. Most official Army histories barely mention him. Stephen Ambrose wrote about him in D-Day, June 6, 1944. Gordon Harrison mentioned him briefly in Cross-Channel Attack, the official Army history. Joseph Balkowski featured him prominently in Beyond the Beachhead, a history of the 29th Division. But most Americans have never heard of Norman Cota. The 1st Infantry Division fought in North Africa, Sicily, Normandy, the Ardennes, and across Germany. They liberated cities. They defeated German divisions. They suffered 20,659 casualties during the war, more than any other American division in Europe. They paid for victory in blood. But Omaha Beach was the moment when the war's outcome hung in the balance. If the Americans had been pushed back into the sea at Omaha, the entire operation would have been compromised. There would have been a 30-mile gap in the Allied line. The Germans could have concentrated reserves against isolated British and Canadian forces. The entire invasion could have collapsed. Everything depended on getting off that beach. And for 2 hours, it looked impossible. But Omaha didn't fail. Not because the plan worked. The plan failed spectacularly. Omaha succeeded because soldiers like Norman Cota refused to accept failure. When the plan died, they improvised. When officers were killed, they led themselves. When staying on the beach meant death, they chose to move forward. Wars are won through the courage of individual soldiers making the right decision at the critical moment. On June 6, 1944, when everything was falling apart and the invasion was on the verge of collapse, Norman Cota stood up and led. Thousands of soldiers followed him. Not because they were ordered to, not because the plan said to, but because someone showed them it was possible.